The Agora Bone Well is a tragedy wrapped in a dark archaeological mystery. A well in ancient Athens filled with the bones of hundreds of infants and street dogs. A cold case that stumped archaeologists until recently. Imagine excavating an ancient well, cut deep into the Athenian bedrock more than 2,000 years ago. You expect to find potsherds, maybe a few coins, the detritus of daily life, but instead you uncover bones, more than 13,000 bones in all. The tiny, fragile skeletons of newborn infants, and among them the remains of more than 100 dogs. Hi, I'm Flint Dibble. Today we're diving into the Agora Bone Well, one of the most haunting archaeological deposits ever uncovered in the ancient world. A deposit that seems to speak of tragedy, ritual, and perhaps something even darker. For decades, no one could explain it. Were these sacrifices victims of a disease, unwanted infants, or something else entirely? This isn't just a story about bones. It's a story about how ancient Athenians dealt with life, death, and what lay in between. In this video, we'll explore what archaeologists have uncovered in the Agora Bone Well, how new scientific studies have rewritten the story, and what this deposit reveals about grief, ritual, and humanity in a pre-modern world. A brief warning though, this video might make you sad, maybe even cry. It's a story about the tragedy of our lives and deaths. But I promise you that it's a worthwhile journey that will teach us all about our shared humanity. A second warning is that there will be images of human remains, some of which might be disturbing. When we think of ancient Athens, we picture gleaming marble temples rising above the city, the Parthenon crowning the Acropolis, statues of gods and heroes lining the streets, and bustling marketplaces filled with philosophers, traders, and citizens debating democracy. But ancient Athens was not just a symbol of art and philosophy. It was a living, breathing city, much like the ones you and I live in. Its narrow lanes twisted between crowded houses. Workshops rang with the sounds of potters, metalworkers, and stonemasons. Behind the grandeur of temples and theaters lay the daily realities of family life, illness, and death. By the 2nd century BC, when our story takes place, Athens had already seen centuries of change. Persian invasions, the golden age of Pericles, and conquest by the Macedonians. Yet it remained a city full of energy and resilience, and at its heart lay the Agora, the public square where religion, politics, and everyday life collided. The Agora was the true center of Athenian life, stretching beneath the shadow of the Acropolis. It was a wide open space, lined with stoas, shrines, and administrative buildings. Here, citizens gathered to vote. Merchants sold olives and pottery. Priests led sacrifices, and teachers lectured students under the colonnades. It wasn't just a market. It was the beating heart of Athenian democracy and society. If the Acropolis was Athens' crown, the Agora was its pulse. Greek and American archaeologists have been excavating this area since the 1930s, uncovering layers of the city's history, from Bronze Age burials to Roman fountains. Beneath the elegant marble of later monuments lie wells, drains, and rubbish pits, remnants of everyday life that tell us far more about how Athenians lived than their grand temples ever could. And one of these wells, tucked near the northwest corner of the Agora, would turn out to hold an astonishing secret. Wells, after all, are time capsules. In ancient Athens, they supplied water, but once they ran dry, people used them as convenient dumping places. Over time, they filled with pottery, food refuse, industrial waste, and the assorted debris of daily life, often sealed off and left untouched for millennia until archaeologists uncover them. Because of that, wells give us an extraordinary window into the past. They preserve organic material, bones, seeds, even wood, that don't survive as well in other contexts. Archaeologists can date their fills precisely, analyze what people threw away, and reconstruct patterns of diet, ritual, and economy. Most wells in the Athenian Agora revealed ordinary activities, water use, household life, animal remains. But the Agora Bone Well that we're looking at today was anything but ordinary. It held a dark mystery, a heartbreakingly vivid tale of all too ordinary life and death in ancient Athens. In the spring of 1938, archaeologist Dorothy Burr Thompson, working with the American School of Classical Studies at Athens, began excavating the northwest corner of the Athenian Agora, discovering a well. Its construction was fairly standard. Dug over 20 meters or 60 feet deep into the underlying bedrock, it was lined with clay tiles. But what she found around 13 meters underground stood out immediately. At this depth, she began encountering something unexpected: bones. Lots and lots of bones. An overwhelming amount of bones. Her notes show her astonishment.
At 14.7 meters, the earth changes. 7 dog skulls. Many animal bones.
She was clearly hoping for grand statues or beautiful painted pottery, as a little later she records,
more vile bones of dogs, etc.
She mistakenly thought these were all animal bones, recording, quote,
numerous skulls of dogs, horse and boar.
The bone-rich layer continued for about 5 more meters, jam-packed with thousands upon thousands of bone fragments, alongside a range of artifacts. It wasn't until Larry Angel, an early osteologist, looked at the bones that the team realized most of them were infants. Hundreds and hundreds of babies had been thrown into this well, alongside the remains of a couple older children, 1 adult, and over 100 full-grown dogs. The material was briefly cataloged and then boxed up and stored in the Agora's apotheke, awaiting study. And there it sat, largely forgotten for nearly 80 years, until a new generation of archaeologists returned to the mystery. The Agora Bone Well isn't just a heap of bones. It's a meticulously layered archaeological deposit. Along with the human and canine remains, excavators found a range of artifacts: fragments of Hellenistic pottery, an ivory sword shape, a marble herm head, and debris from nearby workshops. The kind of detritus you'd expect in a well. These finds help date the deposit to the late Hellenistic period, a time when Athens was under Macedonian rule, but still culturally vibrant. The surrounding buildings had already been abandoned, suggesting the well was being used as a dumping spot long after it had stopped providing water. But the most unusual feature of this well and its contents were these mysterious bones. They were well preserved due to their deep burial in the well, protected from the elements that would ravage and destroy organic materials left on the surface. In many ways, this well was a time capsule, one that could tell a new story about ancient life and death. When the team first uncovered the Agora Bone Well in 1938, they could only speculate. Hundreds of infant skeletons in one place. It was a shocking discovery. At the time, there was little comparative evidence, no precise date for them, and limited osteological expertise. So early on, some wondered, could this have been a mass burial from disease, warfare, or even a site of infanticide? The context, an abandoned well, sealed and remote, seemed to fit all of these possibilities. Perhaps a sudden epidemic had swept through the city, and desperate families disposed of their dead infants here. Others speculated something darker, that the well contained sacrificial victims, symbolic child offerings to appease the gods. Such ideas reflected both the limits of archaeology at the time and the popular imagination of early 20th century Greece, a world that loved mystery and mythology. But as the decades passed and new analytical tools became available, it became clear that the truth was far more complex and far more human. Larry Angel, the first to study the bones, only gave them a cursory look, publishing them in a few short paragraphs in a 1945 article. He noted that they were a puzzle. Thanks, Larry. Real insightful. A puzzle. But at the time, the deposit in the well was incorrectly dated to when the Roman general Sulla had besieged Athens in 84 BC. Perhaps this mistake had shaded Angel's interpretation, as he suggested either starvation or disease as the cause for so many infants in a well. He wrote that, quote,
"Sudden and drastic starvation was the most probable cause of death for this group."
Although in another section, he also left open the possibility of a plague. He did note that, quote,
"There is no direct evidence for violence."
For others, one of the most persistent interpretations was systematic infanticide, the idea that unwanted babies, perhaps born out of wedlock or with visible deformities, were quietly killed and discarded in the well. It's an interpretation that resonates with some ancient texts. Greek myths mention exposure, the abandonment of unwanted infants. Oedipus is the prime example. He was left to die because an oracle had predicted that he would kill his father, which he famously did before unknowingly marrying his mother. Of course, though, that's a myth and not real history. Let's not confuse the two. It's only more recently that archaeologists began to revisit the evidence with fresh eyes and modern science. A new interdisciplinary team decided to revisit the mystery, led by Maria Liston, a bioarchaeologist, Susan Rotroff, a ceramic specialist, and Lynn Snyder, a zooarchaeologist. They joined forces to bring modern science to this haunting deposit. In 2018, after years of careful work, they published the Agora Bone Well with the American School of Classical Studies at Athens, a monumental study that turns speculation into evidence-based insight. By the way, I have a video interview with Maria about how to study human remains that you should definitely check out after watching this video. But the team's restudy completely upended our interpretation of the Agora Bone Well. It was not a site of horror, but their compelling hypothesis reveals the surprising resilience of ancient people in the face of everyday tragedy. They re-examined the field notes from Dorothy Burr Thompson, correlated the stratigraphy with pottery typology, and applied up-to-date osteological analysis to the thousands upon thousands of bones from the well. Susan Rotroff's restudy of the pottery showed that the material that filled the well did not date to the siege of Athens by Sulla in 84 BC, but rather dated nearly 100 years earlier. From 165 to 150 BC is when this well was filled in. There is no known event from that period that could explain an outbreak of a plague or mass starvation, as Larry Angel had suggested 70 years earlier. Lynn Snyder's study of the animal remains revealed that there were over 150 dogs thrown into this well. They were mostly adults and therefore do not represent natural deaths, but were intentionally killed most likely and deposited here. There are no signs of butchery, so they were not eaten. These were not healthy dogs, nor happy pets. There are many examples of fractures, broken limbs, or other problems. This right here is a healthy dog's tibia. But these from the bone well are a handful of the tibias with healed breaks and bony growths, the poor pooches. This photo shows healed, depressed fractures on the skulls of these dogs. These dogs lived a rough life. Lynn wrote, quote,
"They may well have come from a living population of common urban mongrels or pariah dogs that inhabited the environs of Athens."
The sum of evidence shows that these were not pets, but rather street dogs sacrificed and deposited into this well. We'll return to them in a second to see how the authors think they fit into this puzzle. But the real monumental study in the 2018 book was Maria Liston's look at the enormous quantity of human remains found in the Agora Bone Well. While most of the humans in the well were newborn infants, there was an adult male, a young child, and 2 older infants. The commingled newborn baby remains were analyzed collectively. Only these 4 older persons could be examined individually. They were all very sick. The oldest was an adult male who was 45 to 55 years old. Liston noted that, quote,
there are extensive pathological lesions on the joints found on both the axial and appendicular skeleton. The vertebra, knees, elbows, and shoulders are particularly involved. Multiple vertebrae are affected. For example, the fifth lumbar vertebra is fused to the sacrum.
Throughout the skeleton, his joints had been affected by a terrible disease. Liston diagnosed him with hereditary hemochromatosis, where he had absorbed too much iron, causing problematic symptoms throughout his body and skeleton. Liston also noted with a bit of gallows humor,
ironically, the modern clinical treatment for hemochromatosis is a traditional staple of ancient medicine, bleeding the patient. Had this individual been bled throughout his life, he would have avoided the symptoms exhibited on his skeletal remains.
While we often mock ancient people for bloodletting to cure everything, in this case, it would have helped this individual if only they had let leeches suck his blood. Another unique individual from the well was a child aged 8 to 10 years old. This age was determined from the teeth. Think about how you can age your children based on which teeth the tooth fairy has taken. But the bones of this child were underdeveloped for that age. Dr. Liston notes that this was due to a chronic disease. In this case, diagnosing the child with brucellosis, an infection contracted from unpasteurized goat or cow milk. I know. Raw milk is all the rage these days. It's supposed to be more natural or whatnot. But there are many diseases that you can get from unpasteurized milk, and brucellosis is one that's been found on many ancient skeletons before pasteurization was developed by, ding ding ding, Louis Pasteur in 1862. Brucellosis is not a fun disease to get from your raw milk, as it can impact any organ system in the body, most painfully the skeleton, as with this poor child from Athens. The other two unique individuals were older infants. One was aged only 6 to 8 months old, and they had an enlarged cranium caused by hydrocephalus, an overaccumulation of cerebrospinal fluid in the skull. The modern medical term is from ancient Greek, hydro for water and cephalus for head. This severe symptom would have caused a wide range of problems for this child. As Maria noted,
what is clear is that the child was cared for during a period when it would have become progressively more debilitated and more disturbing in appearance.
Someone did their best to love this poor, sick infant. Unfortunately, at the time, there were no effective treatments for such a condition. The older infant in the group was aged 16 to 18 months and is the saddest case of all these individuals. This poor baby had suffered many broken bones, from a fractured skull to broken ribs and a shattered jaw. Many, but not all of these breaks had healed or started to heal before the death of this infant. Liston wrote,
the analysis of this infant's skeleton suggests repeated trauma over much of the child's life. The pattern of multiple traumatic injuries with different degrees of healing indicate that this infant is a victim of battered child syndrome.
This case simply enrages me. Who the hell would batter a child under the age of 2? Normally, YouTubers love to describe the oldest monument, artifact, or example of human behavior ever found. It makes for a great advertisement for a video. I kind of hate such clickbait titles, but this case is the oldest known example of child abuse in the archaeological record, according to Dr. Liston. And it sickens me as much as I'm sure it sickens you. Infant bones are among the most delicate materials archaeologists ever handle. In many ancient sites, they disintegrate long before excavation. But in the sealed environment of the Agora Bone Well, they survived in astonishing numbers and condition. 13,018 individual infant and fetal bones were identified from roughly 460 different individuals. This material was so similar that it could not be differentiated into individual infants. They were a commingled set of newborns that Maria Liston analyzed as a group to look at statistical patterns in order to solve the mystery behind this Agora Bone Well.
Most of the infants in the well died at or near the end of a full-term pregnancy. Birth is a period of considerable stress, both from the actual process and because of rapid adjustments required in transition from fetal environments to that of an independent organism.
However, the statistical patterns in this group helped Liston answer this cold case and solve how the Agora Bone Well was used. The sex ratio of the infants was essentially 50-50, showing no preference for one sex or another. And the gestational ages at or near the end of full-term pregnancy indicate that most of these deaths were not due to infanticide or starvation, but rather as a cause of naturally high infant mortality known in all pre-modern societies. As Aristotle noted in his book, The History of Animals, most babies die before their 7th day, which fits well with the ages of these newborn infants. Many of the infant remains showed signs of illness or deficiency of some sort. About 25% of the cranial remains showed signs of pathologies due to infections such as meningitis or hemorrhages, cleft palate, which would have led to feeding problems, and some malformed bones were also found in the group. A full third of these infants were preterm, miscarriages, or premature births. Liston writes,
While many of these infants would survive today with medical support, in ancient Athens, most, if not all of them, would have died from complications associated with their immature developmental state.
But most of the infants in this well cluster around a week to 10 days after childbirth in gestational age. It is surprising that so few are older. This potentially relates to the Athenian ritual known as amphidromia, a ceremony where the child would be examined, and after deeming them healthy, they would have been given a name, essentially making them a member of the household. This event traditionally took place 10 days after birth in order to pass that 7-day window, that danger zone, noted by Aristotle. It is likely that many children were only afforded a more proper burial in a cemetery after passing that ritual. The ages of infants and children found in ancient Athenian cemeteries conforms to this hypothesis, with such young infants usually missing, despite the fact that infant mortality would have been a major issue. This is a sad story because it takes place in a sad world. But we shouldn't imagine the Agora Bone Well to only be a story of tragedy. It's also a story of resilience in the face of tragedy. Susan Rotroff's analysis of the pottery in the bone layer of this well shows a strong difference in pottery found in other nearby wells. This well contained mostly wider, shallow, open vessels, a significant pattern. Rotroff writes,
While the disposal of the infants in the well may strike us as unfeeling and callous, there are indications that it was not practiced heedlessly. The numerous ceramic vessels, large enough to serve as coffins, are analogous to those used in the more formal burial of infants.
It's likely that smaller perfume jars and even a baby feeding vessel found in the well represent grave offerings, akin to those found in cemeteries. There are additional signs that the deposition of these remains coincided with some form of ritualistic ceremony. The only large marble statue found in the well represented Aletheia, the goddess of childbirth in Athens, a fitting dedication in this context. The dogs were probably also a part of this ritual. Dogs were sometimes associated with funerary rites, as we know from ancient Greek texts and archaeology, and they were sometimes sacrificed and buried in human cemeteries. I've studied a few such dogs myself from sites near Athens and on Crete. The nearly 150 dogs found in the Agora Bone Well, remember, they were street dogs, not pets. They were likely sacrificed to purify the pollution of the deaths of these unfortunate newborns. Most likely this well was used by one or a few specific midwives who carefully chose an abandoned well to provide some special resting place for these infants. The exceptions are the older individuals found in the well. Given their illnesses, there might have been reasons for excluding them from formal burial. Perhaps the well was known as a disposal site for infants and therefore a convenient location for these sick individuals. When all the strands of evidence are woven together, the infants, the dogs, the few older individuals, and the larger context, a clear pattern begins to emerge. The Agora Bone Well was not the site of a massacre or a plague. It was a structured, deliberate response to a recurring tragedy, the deaths of newborns due to natural infant mortality. It seems so foreign to us because of our modern medicine, from vaccinations and antibiotics to life support machines and surgical procedures that have drastically reduced infant mortality in our world. But we have to remember that most of our ancestors faced the reality of high infant mortality. An estimated 30% of newborns would not have survived in the pre-modern world, compared to 1% or less in our modern world today. It's easy to sensationalize such a find, to imagine sacrificial cults, plagues, famines, or warfare. But the truth is quieter and more powerful. The Agora Bone Well tells us that even amid the grandeur of Athens, ordinary people faced everyday heartbreaks, and they handled them with ritual, compassion, and a measure of dignity. Archaeology often celebrates monuments, temples, and statues, but discoveries like the Agora Bone Well remind us that the most meaningful stories come from what lies beneath these grand facades. This deposit doesn't tell us about kings or generals. It tells us about women, infants, and families, the people whose voices rarely survive in text or stone. The well reveals the everyday realities of ancient Athens, that infant mortality was painfully common, that childbirth was perilous, and that even in a city famed for philosophy and democracy, life was fragile. Yet it also shows how people responded with care and ritual and a structure. These weren't anonymous burials. They were acts of mourning. Through these bones, we can glimpse the humanity of our human past, the quiet endurance of people trying to make sense of loss. When I first read about the Agora Bone Well, I felt an unexpected connection. I was born prematurely myself into an intensive care unit. I was tiny, fragile, and dependent on machines and specialized care. In another time, another place, I might have been one of those infants laid to rest in that well. As I battle cancer today with modern medicine, that thought has stayed with me. Because archaeology is not just about the distant past. It's about empathy. Every bone, every artifact, every layer of soil connects us to real human people. And that's why archaeology matters. Beneath the ruins and the rhetoric, it lets us listen to the whispers of people who never got to speak, reminding us that the ancient world was filled not just with gods and heroes, but with love, loss, and the resilience of being human. It's a sad story, but I hope that you learned something from it. Thank you for listening.
Dibble, rhymes and riddles, tickle, tickle, giggles, squiggle, jiggle, fiddle, Flint on Dibble, rhymes and